The 1930s in the United States began with a historic low. During the Great Depression, more than 15 million Americans, 1/4 of all wage-earning workers, were unemployed. The stock market crash and the sober tone of life changed fashion almost overnight. We will see the demise of the androgyny of the 1920s and a return to narrow definitions of ideal binary gender distinctions. Both men and women shed youth-oriented looks to wear more adult looks. There are two styles of tailoring for men in this era. The first is traditional tailoring, following many of the styles set during the 19-teens and 20s. A youthful style of suit will vanish. Suit jackets will fall just below the derriere, and trouser legs will be cut full and straight. Cuffs are commonly sewn into the trousers. Suits are available in single or double-breasted styles. This will be the final decade for the mandatory three-piece suit, including a vest. Vests are worn with the single-breasted suits, and they are optional with the double-breasted suit. The 1930s form a high point of elegance for menswear. Shoulders are broad, supported by shoulder pads. Suits pinch high at the waist and skim the figure to create a loose silhouette that is not pulled too tightly. The vest features points that help accentuate the waistline. The fullness of the jacket is complemented by fuller trousers cut straight with pleats, vertical pleats set into the front of the leg. The collars of the shirt form a long point, and men have a number of accessories available to complete an ensemble, such as a colorful tie, a pocket square, gloves, hat, and possibly spats. The hallmark look of the 1930s is the double-breasted suit, featuring the peak lapel, also a hallmark. These double-breasted styles feature 6 buttons sewn on in horizontal pairs. Menswear specialists call this a 3-button suit. They are referring to the 3 rows of buttons. Note the 2 top buttons angle outward to complete the look of a wider torso. And notice that the bottom button on the right is not buttoned. The second tailoring style appeared in 1935 after the worst of the Depression was over. It is called the Drape suit. It took more fabric to make and so was more expensive. There was an American version called the Hollywood Drape because of its glamour in the movies, and there was a separate English version. As you can see, the shoulders are exaggerated with very large shoulder pads. The waist is very high and nipped in. The wider shoulders make it look smaller by comparison, and the very high waist makes the legs look longer. Sleeves are fuller at the top a little bit and taper to the wrist. There are no vents or slits cut into the back of the jacket, and the jacket itself is a longer cut. You can see 3 folds of fabric. One is the roll of the suit lapel that does not lay flat against the chest. There are also vertical folds from the shoulder and from the top of the sleeve. This is why the suit is called a drape. In the 1930s, we now see the bottom button of the suit coat left unbuttoned, and in this case, it's to help with the drape effect. The American cut is a bit more voluminous and shows more sag or drape than the version worn in England. Trousers in the 1930s are correspondingly fuller too. They are cut full in the leg, and the fullness starts right at the hip. There's a deep rise because of the very high waistline. The trousers feature single pleats or double pleats in the front of the trouser. There is a flat front style available, as you can see on the right-hand side in the center. Cuffs are sewn in. There's a break over the shoe, and the pocket is no longer a slit in the side seam of the trouser. It is now a slant pocket that's visible from the front, as you can see with the men on the left. Notice also the variety of checks and plaids here. This is a very common combination, pattern combination for the 1930s. We have big trouser news in 1937. The zipper fly is added to men's trousers instead of the button fly. Not all men embraced this innovation, so manufacturers will offer some styles with a button fly for some years to come. While we're here, we have a good view of the vest the man in the center is wearing. He does not button the bottom vest button. And let's notice the fabrics being used. We have two examples of plaid, the man in the center and the woman at the right. The man at the lower left wears a check tweed. It could be a sport coat or a suit. These textured plaids or tweeds are very typical for American fashions in the 1930s. And notice this relatively young man has gone back to using a pocket watch. You can see the watch chain looped across his vest. This is going back to an older style, so he would look more traditional or more adult. Sports coats are now widely accepted for every day in America, but most jobs that require a suit require a matched suit. The man on the far right is wearing a blazer. Please see the vocabulary handout for an explanation of the differences between a blazer and a sport coat, as those terms will be used in the 20th century. Men's casual suits take on more color, with lighter colored sport coats and suits worn in tropical climates or the summer season. Men's shirts retain color for non-business events. Just after young men embraced belts in the 1920s, we will see a return of suspenders in the 1930s. Again, this is a more traditional choice to make a man look more adult or established, and it is a personal choice. Some of the nipped waists in the suits discouraged men from adding bulk by adding a belt. Decorative silk suspenders that may or may not match the tie become a part of the man's wardrobe. Ties are still worn short, but they widen to an average of 3 to 3.5 inches from point to point across the bottom. There's a wide variety of traditional patterns for business, such as stripes, but we also see Art Deco patterns for the outgoing personality. We have big news in men's underwear as well. Briefs are introduced, called jockey shorts at the time, or Y-fronts in England after the seam shaping. These caused a huge sensation, stirred by early advertising. The first order to the stores sold out instantly, with women standing in long lines to buy them for their families. Formal wear takes on a more elegant line with the broad shoulder and the shorter nipped-in waist. For the first time in decades, another color choice enters the formal universe, midnight blue. This is particularly favored in photos and movies. The bow tie will take on a fuller shape on the outer edges that we call a butterfly shape. At a time of extreme hardship for so many, the wealthy maintained formal wardrobes that were even more elegant than before. These extravagant lifestyles were featured in many Hollywood films and the society press, so the nation could live vicariously. The availability of ready-to-wear tuxedos flourishes, as well as the option to rent items and return them. As a result, even those who are not wealthy begin to dabble in wearing formal wear for weddings, college proms, and any number of special events. To the 1930s, men's formal wear was fixated on being respectably correct and not calling attention to itself. In the 1930s, tuxedos will branch out to include new colors and lapel shapes. Men's hair shows variations of two styles. The pompadour at the top shows volume on the top of the hair and the sides. The second style continues from the 1920s, flat hair that has a shine added to it. Many men's hair texture fell somewhere in between these styles, and so we see a number of styles that feature a strong side part with volume or waves on the top. Black men continue flat hair from the 20s, as you can see on the left, with a little volume on the top and a fade or short sides. In the center, we can see the conch style continues, made into a pompadour. And the compromise for many men is on the right, with volume worn on the top and a little bit on the sides with a strong side part. In the 1930s, hat styles for men would remain the same as the 1920s. From left to right, the most common styles are the Homburg, the derby, the straw boater, and the flat cap. The king of hat styles in the 1930s is the fedora, popularized by movie stars such as Humphrey Bogart. Americans wore it at an angle with the brim dipping over the forehead. The crown is accented with a wide hatband. In the 1930s, we further develop another American fashion icon, the leather jacket. After World War I, leather jackets were adopted into the civilian wardrobe, primarily as an outdoor jacket with buttons like a sport coat. The jackets were especially appropriate for a new style of transportation, the motorcycle. In 1928, New York coat maker Irving Schott created the first purpose-designed motorcycle jacket specifically for Harley-Davidson. He used a zipper instead of buttons. The jacket was named the Perfecto after a cigar. He went on to produce the bomber jackets for World War II Air Force pilots and to design most of the styles of leather jacket that have become an important part of the American vocabulary. The main pace-setter for men's fashion was King Edward VIII. He abdicated the throne to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. Newly dubbed the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, they went on to a life of luxurious jet-setting and setting fashion trends. In 1936, her blue wedding suit created a sensation. Her famous statement, "A woman can never be too rich or too thin," sums up the ideals of this era. Edward was a fashion leader in his own right, setting many trends, including the use of +4s for sports during the 1920s. It is ironic that one of the greatest chapters of elegant menswear occurred during the economic hardship of the Great Depression. Future designers will reach back to this decade over and over for inspiration. A 1930s menswear buyer for a department store noted that new styles always started with those who had their clothes made for them by bespoke tailors. Those styles become popular when men can see other men wearing them. One such pace-setter for the elite was the Duke of Windsor, as we saw. Younger men tended to follow styles that take shape where the socially prominent young set congregates, in whatever spot is hot at the moment. In the 1920s, that was nightclubs in New York and college campuses. In the 1930s, it becomes resorts such as Monaco and Palm Beach, Florida, where the wealthy escaped in the winter. Colleges continue their role. Another major force was the glamour of Hollywood movie stars. In the year 1930, weekly attendance for movies in the United States was about 65% of the population weekly saw a film. This would influence what the average man wore. In the 1930s, then, men's styles were influenced by the jet setters, the resort, the campus, or the glamour of Hollywood movies. And those style setters all favored an elegance that enhanced the male physique with glamorous tailoring.